Today we're picking up with our discussion of types of missions, and somewhere along the line you have to talk about parachurch organizations when you're talking about missions. Some people would argue that every mission is really a parachurch organization. What do you think a parachurch organization is by definition? All right, someone or some group that works along with the church. I believe that the understood thing in most cases is for the benefit of, and for the support of, for the aid of, and to extend the influence of the local church. You don't see too many churches today that are single-handedly publishing newspapers, producing television programs, running radio stations, running evangelistic organizations. Usually these things are not under the control of a local church. Occasionally you find churches that may be majoring in one or two things. It's quite common to see local churches that run educational institutions. We're like that. There's a Bible chapel in San Leandro, California that runs a discipleship internship training program. It's one new thing. It's run by the elders of the church. Grace Chapel down in California, John MacArthur's place, they run a seminary or college, master's college. So this is quite common where you find that local churches will sometimes major on something, and you couldn't say that those are truly parachurch organizations, even though maybe they are. Maybe they are legally separate from, and they've purchased additional property and they're staffed by separate people, but really they are very, very closely influenced by the local church, and the local church maintains some kind of serious control over it, right? But usually that's not the case with a parachurch organization. In most cases, these are organizations or ministries that can hardly be influenced by local churches. Certainly are not controlled by local churches. They are usually separately funded by many churches, not just a local church. And they are certainly staffed by more than just the pastor and the elders in the church. So when you're talking about something that is a parachurch organization, you have to consider all these things: funding, legal relationship, staff, personnel, control. Now, let me illustrate with our own particular case. I don't think a whole lot of people at Northland that come here to this ministry realize that in our own minds, there's a crucial distinction between Northland Bible Chapel and Northland Bible College. This has been very clear in my own mind down through the years, because I've been intimately involved in it, and some people probably don't know any difference. I believe the New Testament gives certain guidelines as to the way a church is to be organized. Churches shouldn't have presidents, notwithstanding the Mormon example. Right? But there's nothing in Scripture that seems to indicate the way an educational institution might be run. Well, here we have both. And so we have. It so happens that the staff of Northland Bible College are very closely tied to the staff of Northland Bible Chapel in this case. But in our own minds, we make a clear distinction, right? This is the sort of thing that that makes a parachurch organization what it is. With the passage of time, we don't read, by the way, of any of these sorts of things in the New Testament. You don't have any. You never see anything operating outside of the local church, with perhaps one exception in Acts chapter 19, when Paul was in Ephesus. It says that he separated the disciples for a couple of years in the school of one Tyrannus, and he taught them there. I have no real idea what that was, whether it was a rabbinical school or whether it was a Roman school of some sort, or whether it was a training college, or it just says it was a school. Right? And Paul used it. He adapted his ministry to that. Right? But it seemed to be that it was for the benefit of the disciples in the local church at Ephesus. Right? That's probably the only example you have of a parachurch organization in the New Testament. You don't have any evangelistic organizations. You don't have mission boards in existence. You don't have radio and television, obviously. Right? You don't even have a camel drivers association, Christian Camel Drivers Association. But today, we have all kinds of organizations that exist independently over and beyond the local church. You have a Christian Airlines Association, you have Athletes for Christ, you have, just about any occupation you can think of has their own organization, staff, funded, run, independent from the local church. It does not depend on local churches. In fact, they're generally quite broad and ecumenical in their sources. And so when you talk about parachurch organizations, you're talking about things that include camps and clubs, coffee houses, youth organizations, mission boards, legal aid ministries. There's an outfit down in Southern Ontario that exists to help Christians who are involved in Christian schooling. It's kind of like a legal defense fund. Their parachurch organizations include educational institutions. It includes Christian businesses, evangelistic organizations, TV ministries, humanitarian agencies, publishers, literature distribution agencies, and on goes the list. Anti-abortion groups. Orphanages, soup kitchens. There are literally hundreds of different types of organizations, and I think it's wonderful. I'm very much in favor of parachurch organizations. However, there are certain things that need to be said about them. I can give you a few examples of literature I have in my office. I just got this in the mail a couple weeks ago. Here's an outfit down in Birmingham, Alabama. And I'm pushing for this here. But for $130, you can send 1,000 newspapers to everybody in your community every year. Like I could get 1,000 subscriptions to a newspaper, an 8-page newspaper, Christian newspaper. We would have 2.5 pages in this that would fill out their own material, but everything else is gospel and testimony, written by evangelicals. And you can put your own pictures in there and advertisements and stuff. And for $130, it comes out every 6 weeks. You get 1,000 copies, and you have to pay, of course, in addition to put it in the mailboxes. But that's pretty neat, And it's basically a Christian businessman down in Birmingham, Alabama, that has kind of gotten into this because it's a way he can serve the Lord and help churches reach out into their community. I think it'd be a great idea. What a thing to inform people in this community and to witness to people, to get Christian literature into their own homes. It's a great idea. It costs a little bit of money, but anything's going to cost money, right? Here's a parachurch organization. Who produces Days of Praise? ICR, Institute for Creation Research. They also, now ICR Ministries it says right in the back, include the ICR Graduate School of Creationist Science, books and audio-visual materials, seminars, debates, workshops, Bible conferences, weekly radio program, monthly newsletter, daily devotional guide, scientific research, ICR museum, tours. Now, none of that stuff is put on by a particular local church out in El Cajon, California. These people are a parachurch organization, but they are filling a tremendous need in our society. Very few local churches would have PhDs in half a dozen different sciences, defending Christianity, right? So these people are filling a tremendous need today, and local churches have benefited. I use their material, Right. Here's another type of parachurch organization. Here's a newsletter put out by two women in assemblies in Southern Ontario. Right, the KNOW newsletter. Right now, basically, this is an information arm of a sending agency. These ladies organize a mission support agency, basically, and they have. I don't know where it is, but somewhere in Southern Ontario, they have a place where you can send stuff, and when brethren missionaries come home on furlough, they can go there and they can shop free, sort of. Like they can go through and they can pick out a certain limited amount of stuff free. Groceries, clothes, equipment, And these ladies solicit help from assemblies all over Canada, right? And so they are a helping arm for missions, right? These people don't send the missionaries. The brethren assemblies are probably as close to anybody to the biblical pattern when it comes to actual mission work. Where the local churches commend and maintain the control over missionaries on the field, right? But and they not only commend them and control them, but they support them as well. But these people, like the MSC, the Missionary Service Committee in Canada, or the CNML, Christian Missions in Many Lands, Incorporated in the United States, they have, I don't know what is it, a 1 or 2% overhead. I don't know if they even take any of the money for their own overhead. Maybe they don't. Ken would know.
It's in that book, the yellow book.
Yeah.
I don't think they take anything. No, they don't take anything off.
It's all voluntarily, or it must not be voluntary.
No,
it must
people
be.
get money directly to the corporate.
Yeah.
But they don't take any money from it.
So that's a unique ministry. It's a parachurch organization, basically. Right? It's not really the same thing as a mission, because missions, like New Tribes, for example, now they send the missionaries. They're a sending agency. They have their own schools, right? Jacksonville, Florida, and they have one up here in Michigan somewhere. I think it's in Jackson, Michigan. I don't know what the one in Florida is, or Mississippi.
The one in Florida.
And but that's a little different than MSC. Okay.
And their own boot camp.
Yeah. So again, another type of parachurch organization. Here's a very popular parachurch organization. How many of you have ever been to a Bill Gothard seminar? Never been to one? Everybody should take basic, I think. I think it's good stuff. Who? I did, yeah. I don't know. It's well worth the money. It's a punch in the arm, shot in the shoulder, sort of thing.
Maybe they mold them.
Oh, see, this one's got the all-day minister seminar on it, but I don't know what the basic is. I have it downstairs. But basically, what that is intended to do is to build up people. It's kind of like a modern-day prophet. I would class Bill Gothard as a modern-day prophet, where he's hitting the social issues and the personal issues, the basic issues. He's really strong against divorce, against borrowing money, against the educational system of the world, personal compromise, lack of separation, all of that stuff. He hits those kind of issues, and he's carrying out a very important ministry today. Of course, he gets a lot of criticism, and I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything he has to say, but by and large, it's a good ministry. Here's another type of parachurch organization: publishers. Okay, can you name one Christian publisher? Chick. Okay. Ooh, Chick. Okay. What?
You want book covers?
Anything.
Baker Press.
Zondervan. Loiseau Brothers is brethren. Waltrick Publishers. Erdman's is Reformed. Right? And then you've got people like Gospel Light, Standard, Scripture Press. Right? And they in this country we would be in a bad way without those people. I was talking to a guy from Waltrick Publishers about 3 weeks ago on the telephone, and I asked him out of curiosity. I told him we had over the years we've developed probably a dozen fully departmentalized vacation Bible schools, right from K to grade 8 and into high school. Where we develop lessons like we do in Sunday school administration. And the only thing that they lack is professional illustration, by artists. And I asked him, I said, what would it cost to publish something like that? Like we would sell it to you or whatever. And he said, it's impossible. It's impossible to do. He said just to produce a quarterly manual costs something like $5,000. Quarterly teacher's manual. That doesn't have illustrations in it and stuff. It costs about $5,000 just to put one of those things out every year. Like just to make it. That's not including the cost of printing and buying materials. It's just the work that they have to pay professionals to research, organize, type, and lay it out. $5,000 for just a quarterly manual. Yeah. Right, so publishing falls in this category. Here's another one, Christian book distributors. It's just it's basically a business, but it's ministry oriented. The same thing with all of these things. They're basically businesses. They have to be today to survive. They have to be accountable to the government. Bill Goddard charges a fee for his stuff, right? And the missions, they now like New Tribes Missions and MSC and stuff. I'm sure, and probably ICR. Well, they actually say that they'll take voluntary contributions, primarily supported through voluntary contributions, but many of them have to exist as businesses today. All right, now what are the negatives and the positives? Let's talk a little bit about that. And evaluating parachurch organizations. One of the undeniable negatives is that they divert funds from the support of the local church ministry. They divert funds from the local church. Some people probably find it much easier to give to people they don't know than to give to their own local church, and they've got squabbles with the eldership, and they don't like this, they don't like that, and they got their own pet peeves. You understand? And it's much more exciting to give to Back to the Bible broadcast for an airplane project, right? Especially if they've gone down there and they've been given a guided tour and they were treated with given a red carpet treatment, and everybody smiles, and they were there for 3 hours, and they don't have to live with people, right? And so this is the sort of thing you find out. And today a lot of people are really susceptible to manipulation this way as well. And Oral Roberts is an extreme example of this sort of thing. Talk about diverting funds from local churches. He diverts funds from little old ladies and pensioners. You know, Brother Ike, you know, black evangelist I saw on television one time, you know. Man alive, he drives around in a few Cadillacs and he's got gold rings on his fingers and dressed just like only a black person can dress, you know, and putting on a floor show basically in the name of Christ, you know, and preaching a false gospel to boot, you know, and then promising that if you'll send $5, you know, he'll send you a prayer cloth to lay on top of your radio so that when he's on the radio, you put that prayer cloth on and a special miracle will happen, you know. That's a miracle. Right? And so there, it has been very much abused today. Parachurch organizations, you know, channeling millions of dollars. You know, it really bothered me when Jim Baker and PTL were on the air. You know. And today their ministry has primarily been destroyed. You know, and I think rightly so. I think God's judgment fell on that thing because of the abuses. All right, another negative is that I believe that in a general way, parachurch organizations divert the proper emphasis that Christians should have from the exercise and development of their own gifts in the local church. Today you have what is called the media church. The media church. We have so many opportunities for turning on the radio and the television today, for example, that it has definitely affected the local church. People would rather just sit in their lazy boys at home on Sunday morning and turn on the knob. Yeah. Now, if a person is bedridden or something, well, then there are legitimate blessings from something like that. But it certainly has provided an opportunity for people to be diverted from supporting the local church with their bodily presence and from getting involved. Why should I bother to learn how to preach if you can just say, well, you know, turn to channel 23, you know, you can see whoever, you know, if you want to hear some preaching. Another thing, too, is that it takes personnel, it takes qualified personnel, it takes skilled people to run parachurch organizations, and these people are coming out of local churches. By and large, they're being diverted from the local church. The person is working. Now, I don't know whether some people would disagree that this is a negative. They would say, well, this person is simply putting his gifts to the best possible use. He's maximizing his potential in a parachurch organization. Well, I agree. I think that perhaps Jack Van Impe would never become as effective as he is in preaching if he hadn't gotten into evangelism and developed the sort of ministry that he's got. Right? It's undoubtedly true that when a person joins a mission, for example, and goes into mission work, that they are going to develop, and they'd be no good to the local church anyway at home. Not that they wouldn't be any good, but like the local church doesn't want a person to stay at home. It's good for them to get onto the mission field, and if a mission board, which is a parachurch organization, can use them, well, so be it. Well and good, right? So there are both negatives and positives here. I think the negative side, the downside here, is that when the parachurch organization isn't legitimate or is duplicating something that really is the local church's job, and when it diverts people away from that, well then, I think that that's the downside. One of the more serious negatives about parachurch organizations is that they tend to become ecumenical and to develop low standards with the passage of time. This is a broad generalization. It doesn't apply to everybody, but in many cases, parachurch organizations tend to sink to the lowest common denominator and begin to operate not on biblical principles, but on pragmatic principles. You know what pragmatic means? Pragmatism is, it doesn't matter how you do it, just as long as you get the job done. So methodology, you begin to operate merely on utilitarian principles that get the job done, that work, whether or not they're biblical or not is beside the point. Right? So they shift from the biblical foundation to a pragmatic foundation. And the reason they do this is to gain numbers and to gain or maintain the support of a large constituency. These people, if somebody has bought property worth $3 million near an urban center somewhere in the United States or Canada, it takes a lot of supporters to maintain the taxes and the upkeep and to run it. These television preachers are crying. It costs big bucks to keep television programs on the air. Right? And the pressure on these people is immense to maintain the broadest following that they can, and so they're very much open to the temptation to waffle on their beliefs and on their principles, just to keep the money flowing, just to maintain the cash flow. Bible colleges are not immune to this. We are able to survive because we don't have a lot of overhead, but some colleges, they have big numbers of staff. They have their staff, there's a word, it's not indentured, but it means that they've promised them, they've actually signed a contract for the next 3 years for a staff member, as professor of history or psychology or something. They have to pay that guy for the next 2 years. What if the money stops next year? The guy can take him to court and sue them. Which probably happens today in Christian circles. What? What's that? Yeah, there's another word for it. That's not the one I was thinking of, but maybe it's something similar. But the point is that Christian ministries today are really over a barrel, financially. And so they need money, and boy, oh boy, when the pressures come, when their issues arise and stuff, it divides their constituency. It's always happening in Christian circles. The issues will divide Christians, and most organizations can't afford to take a position on it because they're going to offend both sides, and so they take no position. They take no position. Basically, that's a compromise. Some schools won't take a position on the all-mill, pre-mill, post-mill issue, because they know that their support would split right in half, and so would their student body. Sure. It's an unfortunate situation. So these are some of the negatives. Another negative is that churches are largely unable to discipline or to effect change for the better in parachurch organizations. One of the classic examples is Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. The Assemblies of God, which is the United States Pentecostal group, which parallels the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, PAOC in Canada. The Assemblies of God in the States, they passed judgment as a church body on Jimmy Swaggart. And what did he do? He thumbed his nose at it. They said he wasn't supposed to preach for 2 years. He was back in the pulpit in about 6 weeks. And so his whole ministry is a parachurch organization, and there's nothing that people can do, nothing the local churches can do.
His empire was crashing.
Yeah. But there's an example. Other examples are, let's say, Christian Service Brigade in Canada. When my dad was the pastor of an independent Bible church in Southern Ontario. When I was a kid, I went to Stockaders. Yeah, that's the older group. Stockaders is I don't know what the age division was, but up to grade 3 or 4 for Stockaders, and then you went into Brigaders. And the CSB is kind of like Awanas, only they're much broader in who they will work with. They'll work with Salvation Army, Alliance, Wesleyan, United, Methodist. I don't think they work with Pentecostals, although they probably, maybe they will, because I think the Pentecostals have their own group called Pioneers, or something like that. But anyways, I went to Boys Brigade camp up in Halliburton, and I wasn't aware of it, because I was just a kid. But my dad found out after, when I came home, because some of the other kids in the church came home, a little bit older, they were talking about that their counselors were telling them they could lose their salvation and this and that. Right? He decided right then and there that he was going to get out of Boys Brigade. And it split the church. Split the church. And he left People's Bible Church and started Thames Valley Bible College. And there's an example that local churches can't change an organization like that. Right? He was very hesitant to get into Awanas. He was very hesitant to get into Awanas for the very same. I was burnt, always sore. We're always sensitive, you know. And there's very little that you and I could do to change the Awana program if they started to go liberal for some reason. Sure. Now they got so much feedback from people on it that they compromised or took a halfway position and said that they support both. You know.
What they're going to do? Are they going to go with the new and the main effect of more change? Yeah, but it also affects Sunday school. Sunday school is oh. So he's got one organization.
Yeah. So these are the downsides. They can do great things, but there are certain ramifications of them. The positives. Let's look at the positives of parachurch ministries. There's no question that they've come into existence because of the need for diversity and specialization in ministry today. There are simply, in the kind of society in which we live, there are 1,000,001 ways and opportunities for ministry that the average local church has nothing to do with. For example, there are not very many local churches that can teach young men how to fly an airplane and to take down and work on a motor and rebuild it so that you could be well prepared for missionary aviation fellowship or work as a missionary pilot, right? So that requires specialization. Same thing with computer programming. Same thing with radio work and television work. You know, very few local churches have any ability to maintain control and education and everything else on these areas, right? And so there's a legitimate need for parachurch organizations, and this is why I'm not opposed to them in principle, because there's a need for them. Secondly, the parachurch missions or organizations can and do complement the local church's ministry. And every church is benefiting from parachurch organizations today. Every local church is benefiting from them. You know, I get news information from New Tribes and from No, and I use Sunday school papers from Scripture Press, and I maybe we'll get to use these newspapers through this Birmingham outfit. I find out where I can get cheap books from this outfit. You know, I use stuff. We are just inundated in our society with materials from. You can get audio tapes from places. You can get videotape ministries now. It's amazing, right? And so parachurch organizations and missions are very much complementing and helping the local church's ministry and the reputation of the church and the witness of the church as well. Right? There are not very many churches that have video cameras. We happen to have one, but we're not using it there that much. You know, there's a wide open ministry right here in our church for somebody to use that video camera. In the tape ministry, but then there are people that are supplying cheap tapes to shut in and things like that. It's a parachurch ministry. And then thirdly, parachurch ministries can make it possible for specially gifted people to get more involved. It really is one way that you can develop disciples. You may lose your disciple, you know, but why do we exist anyway? You know, just to go out into the world, send people out.
Going in the Lord's will.
That's right.
Maybe make that good place.
Now there are a few inherent weaknesses to parachurch organizations and missions that need to be mentioned as well. I believe that parachurch missions are subject to very much greater abuse by single individuals. They're subject to greater abuse by individuals. Who's responsible to protect the local church from false teaching? The elders. And the New Testament teaches plurality of elders is required. Right? In other words, you have 2 or 3 or 4 or a dozen godly men that are sitting in judgment on proposed changes in the local church. Right? When things are seeping in, they have a responsibility, they're recognized, and they step on it. They deal with it. They teach. They have the control in their hands. But in a parachurch organization that is operated by one man, you know, one guy holds the strings, like Jimmy Swaggart or Jim Baker or his wife, or you see what happens? You know, you can see that these parachurch organizations are subject to greater abuse. Sometimes, and this is another weakness, I guess you could call it, that parachurch organizations draw undesirable attention. And the media is completely lopsided on this. You never see CBS looking up a Christian organization and doing a positive story on what they're actually doing. You hardly ever see anything like that, you know. You know, but just wait for some Christian leader to fall into adultery. Undesirable attention? Right? A few years ago, ICR was interviewed by Walter Cronkite from CBS. And I read about this, and it was very illuminating. They spent, their crew spent a week, I think it was a week, maybe it was 2 weeks, down there interviewing people, going through the campus, you know, going through all their ministries and stuff, you know, with a video camera, taking pictures. And they did a half an hour program. And they butchered them. They just butchered them. They edited out stuff that they were saying. They take half sentences, part sentences, and they made them look like garbage on national television. Yeah. CBS did a really biased report on ICR. Because news media is generally left-wing, pro-evolutionary, humanist, you know, and they have no love for fundamentalist organizations, even if they're doing humanitarian work. And so they really, you know, ICR reacted against that. And I don't know what the outcome of it was, but I think they probably learned their lesson. You just don't do interviews for major, you know, because it draws, even when you're not doing anything wrong, you get undesirable attention. Right? And there's no doubt about it that parachurch organizations are more subject to government intervention and interference than the local church. You don't find local churches coming under the intense scrutiny of government bodies. Not yet in this country, not as much. But charitable organizations, that's a whole different ballgame. And we're experiencing that right now. Right? The Ontario provincial government has just now established a new commission. I don't know if Dad read you that article yesterday in class. But they've just established a new commission to study the law of charities in the province. Now these guys that came in were from Revenue Canada. They were federal, right? Now the province of Ontario is getting ready to regulate charities within the province. So we'll have two sets of laws to deal with, twice the book weight. Yeah. And it's just parachurch organizations are more subject to hassles than the local church.
Do you think the local church, they the law crack, do you think the local church should be getting the census and stuff that they got years ago? Because everybody is using.
Knowing what I know now, I would never counsel anybody that leaves this school to take advantage of or to apply for tax-exempt status for any ministry that they start. Today, what you have to do is establish ministries and just pay taxes.
That's when I asked you this.
Did I say establish ministries? I meant establish businesses.
Yes.
Like make your ministry a business.
Because here could be business.
Yeah. If we're successful in getting rid of our tax-exempt status, and we're left with enough property to do it, we could turn this into probably a paying proposition. You can make it a business. You can do whatever you want. It's free enterprise, and you're not. The only thing then you have to be careful of is that people don't foresee you as just making money off people and calling it a church.
No, but I think all churches should. I think all churches should want to.
Well, if the government is consistent, what's going to happen is all the Protestants will lose theirs and the Catholics will get theirs. Because the Catholics own half this country. You know what would happen if eh? Yeah. Imagine the real estate taxes that they'd have to pay.
Whatever they want. They just demand a school
Did they? Is that right?
Anywhere out there, if they come into an area and they have enough students, they can demand a school. They can demand that the kids in the schools have to go out. Protestants, it's an own Catholic school. Many things.
Best thing in school.
The thing is, they're getting disposable. So it's not fair. But I'm glad you feel something that I felt for a while.